Have you heard about Community? You probably have. It's pretty popular and you clicked on this video. Well, it's my favorite show of all time. And it's gotten a little bit of a resurgence recently, so that's cool. I've seen the show all the way through multiple times, and most recently I watched it with my family who had never seen it all the way through before. This time when I watched it, I wrote a short review for each episode and put them into tiers based on my own personal opinion. Now that I finished rewatching them all, I organized them into a big ol' ranked list. You'll notice shortly that I don't have an F tier, because I don't think that there are any F episodes in the whole show. I laugh in pretty much every episode. Honestly, a B or B plus tier of Community would be pretty high in most other shows. So just because an episode is in the middle of the list doesn't mean it's not great. And also, spoilers for the whole show, you should really watch it. Okay, let's get started. Yeah, this is the only E tier on the list, and it's subsequently my least favorite episode of the whole show. It's still Community though, so I can't dislike it too much, but this episode just kind of feels like a string of references to previous events in order to try to win over the fans and force a possible conclusion. Like, remember the Darkest Timeline, remember Paintball, remember the Chang Dynasty? We have those too. But regardless of the content in this episode, at least it impacts the story or changes the characters, right? No, it all takes place inside Jeff's head and doesn't really impact him or the plot in any significant way. The correlations between what happens inside his head and him graduating are tenuous at best.
We finally figured out a way to make paintball cool again.
Did you, Abed? Did you really? Remember a few minutes ago when I said that I laughed in pretty much every episode? Well, this is the only one where I don't. Basically, this episode is just a worse cooperative calligraphy. Annie's character really should have moved on from this kind of stuff by this point in her arc, and I'm pretty sure Abed already knew the lesson he learned in this episode since, season 1. Maybe any of the plots in this episode would have been better if they didn't try to give every single character their own story. Full disclosure, I hate amnesia in stories. I find them to be a complete crutch to provide character regression or conflict, and while this case doesn't bother me as much as most, it's still annoying. On a less subjective note, I'm not sure why Jeff is being such a jerk in this episode. Like, usually when he does this kind of stuff, it has a reason with his character insecurities or because of his past or something. But in this one, it's just because, I don't know, he doesn't want Chang back. Nothing Chang did harmed him specifically more than anyone else. It just seems like forced conflict to me. It also just seems like they thought they needed to do a documentary episode because season 2 and 3 did it, and not because it actually elevated the episode in any way. Honestly, the Let's Potato Chips commercial should have just been the whole episode.
Let's snack it up. Let's do it right. Let's taste the crisp with the flavor and crunch with all our might. Let's grab a bag. Let's take a bite. Let's grab the tape.
Get your damn hand off of my lip!
Wait, is this the dissection of the study group always being the center of attention because they're the main characters? Kind of. It has the basic idea, but it doesn't really come together. Luckily, we have wedding videography in season 6 for that. You know what's spooky? Comparing Jeff and Pierce's daddy issues again. Ooh. As the #1 fan of The Sting, I can't help but be disappointed by this episode. Conspiracy theories and the first Chang Dynasty are both better trickery episodes, and Grifting 101 just doesn't seem like it has nearly as much love put into it as the great Community genre episodes. The first episode of season 4 is one of its better ones. It's still not good compared to Community's other episodes, but it's not terrible either. The whole new Jeff thing just kind of seems like a weaker version of what he was doing in investigative journalism. Britta already did Annie's subplot back in Science of Illusion, and the first episode into Britta and Troy's relationship is already highlighting why it doesn't work. Abed's happy place is okay, and with some Harmon it could have been great, but as it is, it's fine. The episode does have more genuine laughs than the typical season 4 episode though.
Oh Lord, no!
Definitely my most guilty pleasure of any episode. The information we get in this episode doesn't really change the dynamic or our perception of these characters, but it's still kinda neato to see the different ends tying together. This episode is usually pointed to as an example of season 4 not getting the purpose of genre episodes and just doing a puppet episode for puppet episode's sake. And yeah, I agree with that to some extent, but I still enjoy this episode and the puppets look really cool, even if Puppet Abed is staring into my soul. A kinda cute episode that doesn't really elevate the premise very much. I'm not a big fan of the Jeff Slater-Britta triangle, but I like me some good dancing. While I love some good Garrett, British subplot feels a bit forced, and I feel like Hello wasn't the right song to use. I think all the Jeff Annie stuff in this episode is pretty interesting, but I don't think it goes well with the whole Annie-Kim rivalry thing all too well. Yeah, this one just doesn't really do it for me. I find the why won't everyone believe me thing to be very worn out, even if it does get a new coat of paint with the way it's told. I don't think it's helped by the extra long runtime of the Yahoo episodes either. Pretty okay, kinda forgettable, don't have much to say about it. This episode might have a little too much of Season 1 Chang for my liking, but it also has Green Day. Dad Chang is fun, other than that, it's not a super remarkable episode. God, those high schoolers are annoying. What even is a Schmitty? I have no idea, but the college bucket list thing is great. This is strangely light on laughs for a Community episode, other than Abed's stand-up bit. Pierce and Bond have the most engaging romantic arc of Season 1. A solid enough episode, but feels more like a setup to the far superior Anthropology 101. I always like seeing Jeff and Shirley together, and the multiple character breakdowns are fun, even if it is kind of uncomfortable seeing Annie manipulate her friends. No doubt the best part of this episode was seeing the different ways they incorporate the brief footage they have of Chang into different situations.
More than a maniac. I'm
Other than that, this episode can't really decide what it wants to be. It's about Abed not wanting to make a bad movie, and then suddenly it's about Jeff being insecure. I don't know, it seemed kind of out of left field to me. But the real issue is that they bring in Randall Park in the end as himself, but Randall Park already played a character in the 5As of Greendale Community College shorts, just as for Brody Leeds. I think Abed comes off as much more obnoxious than charming in this episode, which I get is a setup for the upcoming conflict with Troy, but does make a slightly annoying experience. And I might just be grasping at things to criticize. What is my purpose? Why do I feel the need to rank? Does it matter which episode is my favorite show I like more than others? Why must I quantify my appreciation for television with an arbitrary system that I'm not even sure about? In rewatching this episode through the critical lens, am I draining my enjoyment for each episode? Sorry, I don't know what happened there. The episode's fine or whatever. I get that this was an attempt to do a makeshift series finale and the chance that the show got cancelled, but because of that, it feels like they crammed too much stuff into one episode to give partial closure. I know it's not really their fault, but that's how the episode turned out, so I'm basing its ranking on that. Also, can we just stop a moment to appreciate Mr. Screen Junkie's man Hal Rudnick's cameo here? I kinda wish they'd stuck to the no story theme for an entire episode, but for what it is, I like it. Might be a little too meta for its own good, and wow, that ending tag was dark. At the very least, I've got to give it props for giving us Vampire Abed. Elroy Patashnik was a character who, while played very well by Keith David, wasn't ever particularly captivating to me. His first episode is pretty average Season 6-wise. Seeing the increasingly mundane things the Dean does in virtual reality is fantastic, and Chang's cat hand is great as well.
Hi, I got bit by a cat.
But I don't really care for Brita's subplot that much. The actual play they put on is pretty funny, but I laughed way more the first time than on the rewatches. The two great B-plots are way stronger than the A-plot. Fun episode, I like Brita's subplot, but the best part of this episode is the introduction of Magnitude! Pop, pop, baby! Magnitude is not only the best character in Community, but the greatest character in television, nay, fiction in general. Abed's films are endlessly entertaining, and the episode is the beginning of Jeff and Annie as a romantic couple. I just wasn't a huge fan of the Pierce and Britta hypnosis thing. Pretty standard Season 1 episode, so still really sharp and funny, even if it isn't mind-blowing. Also the first appearance of Leonard and subsequently telling him to shut up. Just because they mention that the replace an expensive object plot is tired doesn't mean this episode is excused for being one of those episodes. But like I said before, I like Jeff and Shirley as a pairing, and their arc is really good here. That anime sequence was really well animated too. Pretty fun episode, nothing too special. Jeff's Hallmark speech to Rich at the end is golden. This is my least favorite of the Secrets Getting Revealed trilogy, but I still love it when the dialogue gets to shine. But as seems to be the main issue with a lot of Season 6 episodes, the longer runtime bloats the pacing, but this is one where I don't mind too much. Troy and Jeff find a trampoline. Huh. Troy and Abed being normal is a stroke of genius, even if it is resolved a little too abruptly for my liking. I like how Jeff and Britta both have wedding-related baggage that they go through in this episode, even if it isn't taken to a particularly deep place. Making the Britta as a verb joke into an actually interesting character motivation in this episode actually turned out really well. Yeah, this is the same thing as the pilot. That's what every pilot is. All this needed to be was a good kicking off point for Harmon's return to the show, and it is. It's like what Force Awakens was after the prequels. Only the ending of Community turned out a lot better than the ending of that trilogy. But yeah, I like this episode. It's exactly what it needed to be. Only it was weird that they did it without magnitude. Season 5's ending was very ambitious and worked more in some areas than it did others. The resolution was a bit rushed, most likely due to the show possibly ending, kind of like in Season 3. But we also get some really great moments like Jeff powering the robot and the fake NBC commercials. Solid Pierce and Jeff episode, and I'll always love the air conditioning repair school. Neat analysis of Jeff's relationship with women, and it also has the STD fair, one of the best of Greendale's many events. The goal of this episode is cool, and I like a lot about it, but it isn't as enjoyable for me as a lot of Community's classics. I still really like it though. The reveal that Chang learned all his Spanish from Sesame Street makes rewatching his lessons so much fun. This attempt at making another Paradigms of Human Memory had a lot of funny gags, but didn't quite come together as well or provide the same meta-critique as the first one. Kind of reminds me of Interdimensional Cable 2 in Rick and Morty. Abed Batman is brilliant, and the rest is really good too. It shows early signs of the deep bond Jeff would come to have with the study group later in the series. It's really fun to see the different stories that the group comes up with. Abed and Pierce's are my favorites. I don't dislike the insanity test reveal as much as most people. I don't like it, but I don't hate it either. It's just kind of annoying that it comes out of nowhere in this specific episode. Jack Black's buddy makes me very uncomfortable, which is on purpose, I know, but it makes the episode kind of hard to watch nevertheless. However, seeing Jeff attempt to move away from who he was at the beginning of the series is very narratively satisfying. Really good episode all around. The Dean and Jeff subplot is the clear standout though. Vicky and Neil are a love story for the ages. When I first saw Jeff and Pierce during the Spanish epic, parading around in clown costumes and waving their flags, I knew that this show was special. This is a fun time. I always like me some Jeff confronting his mortality. The olives thing kills me. Wow, how Season 4 managed to handle Jeff meeting his dad this well is nothing short of a miracle. It's highly emotional, mature, and really satisfying for something that had been built up so much. The Shawshank subplot is pretty good too, but Jeff's subplot gets the episode this high for sure. A great start to my favorite season of the show. It's got Troy, Abed, and Betty White singing Africa by Toto. I mean, come on. This is the first episode of the show without Donald Glover, and while I feel his absence, I still think that the episode works out pretty well, all things considered. All the different hoops Annie and Hickey have to go through for the bulletin board are fun, and the whole bear down for midterms thing is something only Community could come up with. How could I not put this episode in at least A- here, when it contains the funniest moment in all of television?
Well, I'm a pie.
Our first real look at Troy as a character. Also, we get Abed laying low in the first appearance of the Greendale human being. I love this episode. There's not much that's super introspective or anything about it. It's just a really fun time. Also, Troy and Abed in the morning gives us the first real insight into the creative ways the show would use its stories to dive into the characters. Also, that cool Abed film stinger is so funny that I named my channel after it. That opening song is, as a wise man once said, funky fresh. And seeing Jeff go insane and Pierce do something really nice and mature is a cool change of pace. Seeing how Jeff went from not even liking the study group to literally going crazy without them is revealing about his character and arc as well. The scene of the group looking at each other as romantic options is one of the best achievements of comedy in the whole show. Seeing the students rise up against Greendale is extremely entertaining, and the Starburns tribute is a highlight of the series. Hey, it's the halfway point of the show! Let's rank the webisodes, cause why not? I'm using the Wikipedia list of webisodes, so if there's something missing, blame it on them, not me. I'm only gonna chime in on some of them because they're webisodes. Okay, let's go. Number 25 through number 23, Abed's Master Key Parts 1, 2, and 3. Just unfunny, feels like the worst parts of Season 4. Number 22, Miracle on Jeff Street. Slightly better than Abed's Master Key just because of the insanity of the idea. Number 21, Road to the Emmys, playing Britta off. Feels the most like an ad out of all the sponsored webisodes. Number 20, Study Break, Truth or Dare. Number 19, Study Break, Stop Using Your Brain. Number 18, 5 A's, Air Conditioning. Funny joke, but too short to be ranked any higher. Number 17, Dean Pelton's office hours. Pamphlet serious. Not sure how I feel about the system-shattering reveal in this episode. Number 16, study break, generation gap. Number 15, Dean Pelton's office hours, independent study assistant. Number 14, 5As, awesome new friends. I'm still annoyed that they didn't acknowledge the existence of Brody Leeds in Season 6. I'm sorry, I'm just not over it. Number 13, Road to the Emmys, playing Jeff off. Number 12, Spanish Videos Part 2. Not as good as the first one, but it basically acknowledges that. Number 11, Road to the Emmys, seat fillers. Number 10, 5As, accessibility. Number 9, Community Season 4 premieres someday. Funnier than most episodes of Season 4. Number 8, 5As, affordability. Number 7, Dean Pelton's office hours, hairpiece. Giving Leonard lines is always a good idea. Number 6, Community College Chronicles, my hobo days. The two Community College Chronicles are pretty much the same quality. Number 5, Community College Chronicles, pop quiz. The only reason this one is higher is because it's highly entertaining to see the context for the werewolf. Number 4, Spanish Videos Part 1. Really gives you emotional context for Abed's Starburns tribute. Number 3, 5As, a lot of classes. The fact that this is supposedly the a cappella team that was murdered by Mr. Rad makes this short extremely dark. Number 2, 5As, Pat Isaacson screws up. Pat Isaacson may just be the most interesting character on all of Community. Expect an hour-long analysis of him soon. Number 1, Abed and the Dean share a moment in a Honda. Now, this is how you do an ad. Fantastic episode. The parking lot sailing and Jeff's obsession with Rich are both great. Whenever I hear the title of this episode, I think that it's digital estate planning. Not sure why they made the title so similar, but I digress. It's interesting how Jeff and Annie and Troy and Abed's subplots mirror their subplots in conspiracy theories and interior design. However, comparing the two, we see that Annie is much more confident in saying how she feels directly, and Troy and Abed are less on the same page. While I prefer conspiracy theories in interior design, I do appreciate the attempts to show growth in the characters. I would have liked more resolution to the Jeff and Annie subplot, given that Troy and Abed literally have a whole sequel episode dedicated to resolving theirs, but that's pretty minor. I also can't forget Britta finding her perfect match with the living embodiment of Subway, but I think I've talked long enough about this episode. This is the weirdest episode of Community. This one. It's great. I'm not sure how they got the Kugler trailer at the end to be so accurate, but it is. Yeah, it's ridiculous, but I find it extremely entertaining and fun. A really cool and introspective episode about aging and mortality, which also features John Oliver chasing Ken Jeong around with an imaginary force field. If Repilot was getting us back into Community, then this episode actually kicks off Season 5. And I think it's great. I personally really like Hickey, and he has a fun dynamic with Jeff. I also really like Abed's Nicolas Cage plot. I think it's even better than his Who's the Boss plot and competitive wine tasting. I'm not sure if that's a popular opinion or not. But the real star of this episode is Jeff's plot about teaching. Seeing him have to adjust to being a teacher and then realize that he's actually a pretty good teacher is really fun.
Minuses are made up!
Kind of like bondage and beta male sexuality was for Duncan, this episode puts the Dean in the spotlight. The Dean, despite being a main cast member since Season 3, rarely got A-plots, and this episode delivers. The B-plot with Chang and Annie is also really great and subverts the trope you expect from it. I kind of forgot that those were in the same episode because I thought they were both A-plots, but this was just a case where the longer runtime really let them flesh out both storylines. I like the attempt to give Elroy more character, but I love the A story. It was a really good idea to bring Rick back, and that decision gave us one of the funniest episodes of the season. It's surprising that the first episode of the show holds up as well as it does. It manages to be extremely tightly written and funny with Community's famous quick-witted dialogue, even if it lacks the inventive plots that would come with time on the show. And I have to give this episode credit for introducing one of the greatest ensemble casts of all time, even if Troy and Britta barely resemble who they would become later. I love seeing how the group always being the center of attention affects everyone else, and this episode does that splendidly. It also has tons of great character moments, including some of the best Chang stuff since Season 3. A fantastic episode which shows us who Jeff was and who he shouldn't be again. Also, Troy, Abed, and Annie have a really fun subplot. While I love Abed, he is definitely a flawed character, and I appreciate episodes that point that out and give him room for growth. This is one of those episodes, and I love it. An analysis on Ian Duncan was something I didn't know I needed until watching this episode. Now, this series wouldn't feel complete without it. Frankie's a character who's grown on me a lot with each rewatch. At this point, I really like her, and I think she's a good addition to the cast. Her first episode, the opener of the Yahoo season, is both a good introduction to her and a good showcase for Abed's growth. It also manages to be extremely meta without being in-your-face about it. This comeback was thoroughly entertaining and a great start to an underrated season. Do I think this episode is the absolute masterpiece that some say it is? No. Do I think that this episode is fantastic? Yes. Do I overuse the asking myself with a question and replying with no, then asking another question and replying with yes trope? Most definitely. This episode probably has the best production design of any episode of Community. Shirley Island, Hickey's Machine, they're fantastic. I also love all the cool ideas the writers thought of when thinking about how people would live in this situation. At times, I would say the script feels a little more forced than something like Modern Warfare, and I would have liked a little more focus on Troy given that it's his last episode, but I still think this episode is really great. I'm not crying. I love the Community side characters, and this gives us some of their best moments. Its main plot is also really great, but Leonard Rodriguez vs. Magnitude will go down in history as the greatest cinematic brawl of all time. This episode also has the Notches gag, which is one of the greatest opening gags in the entire show. Basic rocket science perfectly sends up the space mission movie while mixing in a butt flag and KFC. What's more Community than that? This is just pure fun. The ABBA songs add a nice flavor too. This is one of those episodes where they went completely above and beyond. Feels like every joke they could tell, they told, and they tied it all together with a great performance by Jim Rash and a message about loving Greendale for what it is. Mwah! Leave it to Community to do a Pulp Fiction episode and make it the B-plot. Also some of the best acting work from both Pootie and Mikhail. I think this one often gets classified as the worst paintball episode, which technically it is, yeah, but it's still great. It has tons of class and a lot of great moments. I think the only reason it gets bogged down a little is because there isn't as much paintballing as the other ones, but the way they tie in Frankie and the janitors is very clever, and the episode probably has the best action sequences in the entire series. For me at least, this is an underrated classic. This, I think more than any other episode of the homage episode, catches the exact feel of what it's spoofing, in this case Zodiac and other Fincher movies. The lighting is perfect, and the fact that it's about the ass-crack bandit, which is a one-off joke from Season 2, is fantastic. I think the whole Pierce is dead thing comes a little bit out of nowhere, but I think that's on purpose. Doesn't really stop this from being a superb episode. For the record, I think the ass-crack bandits were Annie and Duncan. Sorry, Matt Pet. The first 3 Community Christmas episodes are some of my favorites to rewatch in the holiday season. Even if this is my least favorite of the Holy Trilogy, it's still freaking fantastic. The different religious beliefs the group has mixed with the cliche school bully and Pierce and Troy teaching Jeff how to fight, all culminating in the big brawl at the end and then Shirley's song as the camera pans over all their wounds. It's great stuff. Not as good as A Fistful of Paintballs, but still incredible. Magnitude's arc from one-man show to dying for the rebellion is beautiful, and I think about it every time I think of heroic deeds. I did not remember this episode being this good. Like, I actually think this one is funnier than the original. And there are way more editing jokes in this one, too. I don't think the emotional through line is as strong, but aside from that, this is fantastic. A straight-up blast. Absolutely hilarious. It's one of those episodes that mimics its source to a T, all the while giving us an engaging story about a young yam who was killed in the prime of its life. The only reason this isn't higher is because it doesn't have the character depth that a lot of the best Community homages have, but regardless, it's still fantastic. The perfect dissection of the power dynamics in the study group. I also just love the premise of a chicken finger-centered mafia. It's also just one of the funniest episodes of the show, and gives you a lot more insight into Abed and Jeff than we had gotten so far. I really, really love this episode. The constant double and triple crossing in this episode is an absolute delight, and Annie's outburst is haunting. We also get the first pillow fort, which is a masterpiece of set design. This feels the most Always Sunny out of every episode, and it really highlights just how self-destructive the group is. The episode also has one of the funniest Chang subplots of all time. Wait, why is this episode an S tier? Isn't it just a mix of cooperative polygraphy and intermediate documentary filmmaking? Well, thank you for asking, Split Personality. Remind me to get you checked out. Yeah, this episode is a little derivative of those two, and I don't like it quite as much as them, but there's something that really draws me to this one. I think it's the emotional edge that we don't always get in this type of episode, or with Pierce-centric episodes in general. It might also be that this episode is just really funny.
I also leave you this liquid nitrogen-cooled cylinder of my hyperviral sperm in case your lesbian lifestyle one day wears out and you wish to raise an army of geniuses.
This episode is absolutely glorious, and I can totally see why it's some people's favorite. It's not mine, but it's still amazing. This episode perfectly plays on the group's insecurities, be them suspicion, family issues, or LeVar Burton. I've heard people say that they don't know how this episode could have been in Season 4, but for me, part of the reason why it's so good is because it's in Season 4. We had to slug through the awkward relationship between Troy and Britta for a whole season, and by this point we feel exactly the same as Troy. This is a prime example of Community using a genre spoof to understand its characters. The script is so tightly written and fantastic. Donald Glover does a really good Abed, and the Dean is really funny too. Someone better get Jim Rash an Oscar for screenwriting. Oh wait, I can't really fault this episode for its bizarre placement in the middle of the big Season 3 finale because that was most likely just a network or scheduling issue. But aside from that, this is a fantastic episode. The game's 8-bit design and environments are beautiful, and the gang uncovering how the game works is highly entertaining. The dialogue in this episode does feel a bit cheesy at times, but I'm 99% sure it was intentional to go along with the 80s video game aesthetic. The stop-motion Christmas special manages to both feel exactly like the old Rankin Bass specials and subvert them. It brings the Community heart and wit, and celebrates Christmas as a time for being with the ones you love, even if you're not Christian, and even if your loved ones are your friends and not your family. The songs are really fun, and the episode is just really funny and creative in general. This episode perfectly encapsulates what Community is about, and kicks off the glorious streak of cooperative calligraphy through Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas in Season 2. This episode is so good. The way the campus transforms into an all-out war zone is fantastic. I also love how everyone just immediately acts like they've been in the paintball war for years. The dialogue is perfectly written to suit this genre, and it's extremely well shot. I also actually really like the focus on Jeff and Britta as a couple in this episode because it has something to say about the relationship. I guess I could have used a bit more of the rest of the study group, but that's pretty minor compared to how much I love this episode. As a fan of Christmas, musicals, and Community, I adore this episode. Every single one of the songs is an absolute banger. From the Christmas rap to the Glee song, they're all fantastic, hilarious, and infinitely catchy. I've heard some describe this episode as too cynical, but I don't see it that way at all. I think the whole point is that while forcing happiness can lead to darkness, there's still genuine happiness to be found in your loved ones, and I think that's a really good message. I don't even think I can critique this episode. It's not like it's perfect or my favorite episode or anything, but something about it just feels so personal to these characters and everything they've gone through. Jeff has come so far from that lawyer in Season 1, Annie's finally following her dreams, and Abed is the one to point out that things are getting too meta. Shirley came back, Justin Roiland cameoed with one of his 2 voices that he can do. It's great, it really is. And the airport scene gets me every time. It's right here at this moment when Jeff and Abed do their second hug, realizing that the show really is ending and they might not see each other again for a long time, if at all. Wow, do I love this episode. I'm as excited for the prospect of a movie as anyone else, but for now, this was a perfect ending. Who would have thought that an episode made to save money would become not only a perfect parody of its subject, but an emotional journey about friendship and embracing childhood? This episode is so good. I mean, how could you not love this episode? It's so good. In my opinion, this is probably the funniest episode of the whole show. It embodies everything Community is about, and it's just a pure delight.
I'm going back in. Why?
It's like, I was made for this.
Seeing all the different stories come together is so cool. Some people might not like the overt self-referentiality of this episode, but I think when it's done right, self-referencing can be a great thing. And if there's a show that can do it right, it's Community. In my opinion, this is the most beautiful and emotional episode of Community. It perfectly handles its themes of identity and growing up. It balances the whole cast wonderfully and gives them all time to shine. It brings the typical wit and charm of Community while also bringing tons of emotional depth and character growth. As a huge fan of spaghetti westerns, I really appreciate the work that went into this episode from a technical level, but from a character level, it's also fantastic. Because this is a 2-parter, we get a whole episode with everyone still in the game, unlike Modern Warfare, and this has some of the best homages, writing, style, and production work of any episode. And giving the focus to Annie and Pierce is genius. Both of them were going through very important arcs at the time. I just love this episode so much. Listen, there's a reason that this is at the top of everyone's list. It's not only one of the funniest episodes of the entire show, but it also has the best deep dive into why the study group is drawn to each other and the different dynamics they have, as Abed highlights in the end.
It won't matter what happens to us as long as we stay honest and accepting of each other's flaws and virtues. Annie will always be driven. Shirley will always be giving. Pierce will never apologize. Britt is sort of a wild card from my perspective. And Jeff will forever remain a conniving son of a bitch.
It's so intricately crafted that I could watch it on repeat and find something new every time. This is not only the greatest episode of Community, but one of the greatest episodes of television of all time. How could this not be number one? Well, that was difficult. Like I said multiple times before, Community is my favorite show of all time. It's extremely special to me. Cataloging my thoughts of the show for this rewatch was really fun. I hope you enjoyed this probably pretty long video. Thanks for watching.